Welcome back to the Fishing Tackle 101 series. So we're just going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about actual lures today. Actual soft plastics, actual spinner baits, buzz baits, hooks, sinkers, just everything. Top water baits. So the whole point of this series is to keep things simple, okay? I want you to understand how it's really not as complicated as it comes off to be, nor do you have to spend the amount of money that you think that you do. It's really quite simple. You can put a lot of thought into it, as I have, but really all you're trying to do is mimic that live bait, okay? The most valuable thing that I have is right here. This is a jig head or a lead head. This is a 1/16 size. I also have a 1/8 ounce size. As you can see, these are also long shank. Now, you don't need a long shank. I've got normal sized 1/8 ounce and 16 ounce jig heads. I've got bigger, smaller, whatever the case. Just to give you some examples, I've got different. That's a green pumpkin head, flat bottom. I've got some other ones here. This is a 1/4 ounce size, much bigger. This one's got a different style head on it. Okay, basically though, that's the most important thing that I have. Any soft plastic that I have can go on that jig head. So, we're getting down to the extreme basics here. What do you actually need to catch a fish? A hook. That's what you need. Generally speaking, you're also going to want some type of weight, okay? Now, some things are weightless. I have some lures that you would fish with a hook, and they are going to be weightless. But of course, you're going to have the hook. Back when I was a kid, we had a split shot sinker, and then at the end of the line, we had a hook, of course. And that's how we rigged it up. I'm not a fan of that style anymore. I don't like them being separate. I love having the hook and the weight together. That's awesome. Okay? Certain situations, certain style rigs, it's going to be different. But basically, what do I like? What makes it so simple? That right there. You can do almost anything with that right there. So, soft plastics, okay? Remember, we're going to talk today about lure design and lure color, okay? When I talk about natural colors, natural design, you literally want it to look like the real thing, okay? So, there might be 20 different colors, but if I'm going to fish with a worm, honestly, I would prefer it to look like an actual worm, okay? That right there looks like an actual worm. I have used these. I have thrown them in there and watched many, many fish take these. You don't even have to do a whole lot with them. Now, once you start to reel it in, it does have an interesting action. It kind of does its own thing. It's called a wacky head worm, but it's natural. It looks like an actual worm. If I'm going to fish with Helgermite, I want it to actually look like a Helgermite. Okay? That actually looks like a Helgermite. This is an Eco Helgermite. It's unbelievably strong plastic, very durable. This 16th ounce jig head would go perfect, I think, with that Helgermite, also with the worm. Yes, that's right. I use jig heads with worms. You don't have to, but why not? Keeping it simple. So that's some examples of something that's very natural. Now, as I've said before, I fish the Ozark streams, okay? The number one bait or food for bass in Ozark streams are crawdads, okay? I understand that in lakes, maybe it's a shad, okay? Maybe in certain places it's bluegill, whatever the case. And of course, there are bait fish in the rivers too. There are shad, there are bluegill, there's minnows, there's plenty of bait fish. But I have seen more bass regurgitate their food, and it being a crawdad, than any other thing. Okay. Also, flaying fish. Sometimes you cut open their stomach and you see what they've been eating. That might be offensive to some. Almost all the time you see crawdads. So, in the places that I fish, the number one, menu item is a crawdad. So, I want something that looks like a crawdad. Now, this is not supernatural looking, but it does resemble a crawdad. This is a Netgear pack-a-craw, possibly a tiny pack-a-craw. Here's an example of a green pumpkin color. This is a green pumpkin that has some kind of pepper flakes in them. Sorry, I can't keep that still. Some pepper flakes in them. This honestly does look like a Missouri crawdad. When you think of a crawdad, some people think of red, the color red. Well, I've caught crawdads many times. Crawdads are not red. In Missouri, anyway. Crawdads are that color. Okay? Now, this is probably too much information, but here, if you throw crawdads in a pot of boiling water to eat them, they turn red, and you'll see a clear difference. Now, a lot of jigs going to be crawdad colors. Green pumpkin, blue, a little bit of blue in there, crawdad colors. Got some swimming jigs here. Okay, here is a swimming jig with a crawdad on it. Crawdad as a trailer. Okay, another swimming jig with a crawdad as a trailer. Here's a chatterbait. This is different. This has a swim bait on it, which is to mimic some kind of minnow or shad or something. This is technically a different situation. It's black. It makes noise. I will get to that. It's an amplifier. So why am I showing you all this? I want you to understand that if you're trying to get into bass fishing, the first thing you need to do is get something that looks natural. Okay? Something that looks natural. That looks like actual bass food. So, of course, bass are going to eat it. So, when it comes to colors, if you're thinking, well, how in the world am I going to choose what color to get? Go with natural. Okay? Why would I pick, a purple, green, and orange colored worm? Why would I pick a red and black crawdad? Why would I pick a yellow hellgrammite? I wouldn't. Now, could you catch fish with those colors? Of course you could. A lot of colors work, but I'm telling you, you're going to have more success with natural-looking lures. So if there's a lure that you like, let's say that you also fish streams and you like, and the crawdad is once again the number one food item for the bass you catch, pick the color that matches the hatch. Pick the color that matches what your bait actually looks like. If it's a bait fish, here is a shad wrap, a Rapala shad wrap. It's a silver color, but it's made to look like a shad. Obviously, shad wrap. Okay, so it's so simple. Pick colors that look like the actual bait. Okay. Now, that's not the end of the story. That doesn't always work, and I'm going to get to the other extreme of that in a minute. But generally speaking, if I'm going to a lake, in the particular lake, most people that catch bass see the bass regurgitate shad, and it's a whitish silver color. That's the kind of bait that you need to be using, okay? If the fish you're catching are feeding on crawdads around rocks, and even if they are a reddish color, that's what you need to be fishing. So go with an artificial bait that looks natural. So simple. So simple. And green pumpkin is the best color. Let's just be honest. If you had to pick one color, green pumpkin. I've got so many baits in that color because it's just a natural color. It works. Green pumpkin is the king of natural colors. Here's a little 4-inch worm in green pumpkin with a chartreuse tail. Now that chartreuse tail adds a little bit of complexity to this. If you go back to the first video in this series, I talked about amplifiers. That's an amplifier. That tail really shows up. Okay, it's really bright. It shows up, and fish can see that. So if you're throwing this particular green pumpkin style worm, you're not having a lot of success, or if you're throwing one like this that doesn't have the tail on it, try a little amplifier. Get a little tail on there, a little bright tail. Maybe that'll help them see it, see the bait. So when would you not go with a natural lure color? Because it seems pretty obvious you always would, right? Well, most of the time, yes. Most of the time you would go with a natural lure color. Are there times where you shouldn't do that? Yes, there is. All right. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm throwing spinner baits. Now, a spinnerbait is obviously a mid-depth lure, okay? It's not top water. You're not fishing it on the bottom. You're fishing it mid-depth. This is obviously meant to look like a fish, okay? The skirt is meant to look like a fish. These are amplifiers, and I'll talk more about them in a minute. But generally speaking, that's your bait, okay? That might draw them in, but that's your bait. Looks like a shad or some kind of whitish silvery fish, which most fish are that color. Now, this would be considered a natural presentation, a natural color. But let's say the water clarity is not good. So that's something that you need to understand. Water clarity. Okay, there might be a day I go to the creek and the water is super ultra clear. I can see down 6 feet to the bottom, no problem. It's clear water, possibly it's running, whatever the case. And then we have a hard rain and a lot of mud washes into the river. A couple days later I go back and that water clarity is maybe 6 inches, okay? This bait didn't stop being a good bait. This bait didn't stop looking natural. The problem is fish can't see it. Amplifier is going to help with that, but maybe you need more. Maybe you're fishing that same spot where you had success with this before, but now it's not working. Even with those amplifiers on there, it's not working. So this is a good opportunity to change color. Ba-bam. Okay? That is not a natural color. Technically, I mean, you could make a case that it's kind of like a bluegill-ish color with a lot of bright chartreuse in it. Maybe it's a sunfish color with a lot of bright chartreuse. But generally speaking, that's not natural, okay? But all of a sudden, you start catching fish. And you're thinking, well, I guess his whole natural pitch was incorrect because now I'm catching fish on this, and no fish looks like that. So if that's the case, realize, well, the water was so dark they couldn't see that, okay? Couldn't see it. This looks more natural, but they're hungry, looking for food. They can't see that one. But this one really shows up in the water. Even though the water clarity is 6 inches, they can see this from several feet away because it's so bright, okay? It really stands out. So that's a time where an unnatural color would work, okay? Another example is black. Pull up here a black jitterbug. Now, this is top water, so this is a little different. What does that look like? In my mind, it's to mimic a frog, because all topwater lures should be mimicking frogs for the most part. That's a whole nother topic. But let's be honest, it doesn't look like... Ouch, I just stabbed myself. But let's be honest, this doesn't look like anything. I mean, it doesn't really look like a fish. It doesn't really look like a frog. And there's no frog or fish that's that black in the streams around here. It's a jointed jitterbug. This is an amplifier, but by the way, we will talk about that. So what on earth would I ever want to throw this? It's not natural. Well, black really stands out in stained water. Okay, when the water clarity is very low, black stands out. Now, when I first heard that years ago, I've heard people talk about that before, and I thought that makes no sense. If you have low light, you'd want white. But no, it's actually, it's not true. White does not stand out in the darkness, but black does. Why does black stand out? It silhouettes well. That's the key. That's what you got to understand. Black silhouettes, okay? It's clearly seen in dark water. You'll have a lot of jigs that are black and blue, and they're perfect in low light conditions. When I say low light, I'm talking about water clarity. If I'm at a stream or a lake and it's getting toward dusk, it's very dark, sun's going down, water clarity is getting low because there's no light out, bam, I'm throwing one of these. At that point, it would be silly to get the most natural looking white and green frog color lure out there, because they can't see it. Let's just be clear about it. Okay, now, but the black is going to silhouette awesome. Now, let's be clear, another reason we're using this is for that reason right there. This creates a sound. This also creates a lot of movement on the water as it goes. The jointed will help in the movement. So all these things make the jitterbug a great lure for dusk fishing, for dark nighttime fishing. So when you think about colors, just think of those two extremes, okay? If the water clarity is good, fish can see pretty well in the water, go with something that looks natural. If the water clarity is stained or muddy, they're probably not going to be able to see it, okay? So in that case, you're going to have to go for dark colors, black and blue, or bright colors, okay? So I want that right there solves your whole problem when it comes to colors. Just think of it like that. You want something to stand out when the water clarity is low. You want something that looks natural when the water clarity is good. End of story. Keep it simple. You honestly could probably go with black and chartreuse and green pumpkin or white for everything, and you would do fine. Okay? Now, one more thing about water clarity. I want you to understand this, that not only is the clarity of the water dependent on whether it's muddy or whether it's clear, or whether it's moving or whether it's stagnant, it's also clear on how much sunlight is penetrating into the water, obviously. So if it's nighttime, there is no light. I don't care if that's the clearest, crystal clear water. You can't see the water. You can't look through it. The water clarity is zero. So light is another big factor. So not just how muddy the water is, but also light, okay? So let's say it's 11 o'clock in the morning, but it's a cloudy day. The sun is not out. The sun is blocked by the clouds, so there is light. You can see in the water. It's daytime, but the water clarity is okay, not great. But now, same scenario, same water, same day, clouds roll back, sun's beating down on you. It's way brighter. Water clarity is much different, okay? So, in that type of a scenario, that adds to the clarity. So, this green pumpkin worm, you can't really tell in here, but if I were to hold this up to the light, you basically could see through it. Okay? And that's fine. That's great. If I had, well, to give you an example, this is not a very good example. This jitterbug, I don't care how you angle this to the light, you're not seeing through that, okay? It's solid black. So if the plastic worm or this crawdad, whatever kind of soft plastic that you're using, when you hold it up to the light, if you can see through that, that's great for sunlight, okay? Sun kind of goes through it, and it helps it look natural. Okay, and if it's like this and it has these little black specks in it, all that detail shows up in the sunlight. Awesome. The sun is going to amplify this, okay? The sun is going to make that better because it's going to shine through it and you're going to see the details for it. But now if it's a solid color lure, whether it's pearl, it's solid pearl, or it's solid black, or it's solid red, sunlight is going to have no effect on that. So certain plastics or certain lures you're going to want to pull out when the sun's beating down. Other lures, it's not going to help at all. Okay? So sunlight matters. And then we're going to get to this in a moment as well in a different video about amplifiers. But I want you to look at these two spinnerbaits again. Natural presentation, silver blades. Unnatural presentation, made to catch the eye of the fish in darker water, gold blades. Now, any spinner is an amplifier. Okay, it's made to look like the scales of a fish as it rotates, but it has to hit light. Okay, so let's say it's a cloudy day and there is no sunlight whatsoever, and the water clarity is really low and you can't really see, and you're throwing this. Well, these amplifiers are not going to amplify it. Okay, they have to have light reflecting off of them. For these to look like little fish and to look like scales on fish, they have to reflect in the light. Okay, it doesn't have to be direct sunlight, it just has to be light. But if there's no light and the water clarity is low, that's doing you no good at all. Okay, now gold actually reflects a lot more than silver does. Gold is way more reflective than silver. So once again, if you're deciding I need to use this lure today because the water clarity is low, it's kind of muddy, and I want the fish to be able to see my lure, notice it's paired with a gold spinner because hopefully there is some type of sunlight that these can reflect off of. So even though sunlight will make the water a little bit more clear, you might have a day where there is sunlight, so these would work great, but it's also stained water, so this is going to show up. If it was muddy and stained water and there was no sunlight whatsoever, this is doing you no good. You'd honestly be better off at that point to have painted blades, maybe a painted chartreuse color, a painted red color, painted black color, because there's no reflecting off of these, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. When it comes to color, it's either natural or it's not natural, but it's meant to draw attention. And the two things you need to concern yourself with when it comes to water clarity is literally the condition of the water, whether it's muddy or clear, and sunlight. Because the sunlight, even though it factors into the water clarity, it's its own thing. It's going to determine the amplifiers that you're going to use. So we're going to end it there. Next time I'm going to talk about amplifiers. I've said it a million times. We're actually going to talk about what makes a lure be amplified. But hopefully that helps you to understand colors. Helps you understand when you should use colors. It's actually very, very simple. So thank you for listening. We'll continue the series next time. And as always, take care.